Next up, we get the hype video for Triple H versus Batista. Batista's frustration growing with playing second fiddle to Triple H. Batista wins the Rumble and chooses to face Triple H for the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania and stay on Raw. Motorhead then play the game for Triple H to enter to the ring for the second time. I didn't realize this happened again. Yep. Not particularly well executed this time, I didn't think. I thought they were a bit rubbish. Although I did like Triple H rising through the trapdoor. That was
so good.
And then he comes out and does exactly what he does as usual with his entrance. Anything you want to comment on about the two bits before the main event?
I thought Lemmy averaged about 1 in 8 correct words during the performance.
Solid game, play, hit, control. Couldn't really get all the words out anymore, could he, the poor bugger?
No.
He is quite unique in that he's a bass playing frontman, which doesn't tend to happen very often. So that's quite cool.
I did think two quick things. One, I know we've talked about his tan before, but my God, did Triple H look like he'd been tangoed before he came? My God, he was orange. And yeah, the hype video for this, the storyline between these two. I mean, I mentioned earlier how they did such a job with Randy Orton. This was the polar opposite in how perfect a job they had done of making Batista seem like the biggest threat to the world title. They did a phenomenal job of building this match. Fair play.
Yeah, I've always understood this to have been a very good build. Though I wasn't witness to it, I've always understood that people really valued it as a great bit of storytelling that WWE did on the course of this match. So then we get the match, a 21 and a half minute match for the World Heavyweight title. Triple H is accompanied by Ric Flair for this one. At the end comes when Triple H goes for a pedigree, but it's blocked by Batista by his neck muscles, I guess. Batista then powers out, hits the Batista bomb and gets the win. Good pop for Batista, I've written here. After the match, Triple H gets up. Batista poses with the belt and Triple H rolls out of the ring. He's helped back by Ric Flair. Matt.
In terms of achieving the objective and achieving the end goal, they did it. Like I said, the end goal was to put Batista over strong, make him look like the man, the new World Heavyweight Champion. And they did. They did that. Crowd, like I said, I thought that the crowd loved it. It looked like they were clearly a fan of Batista and they were happy that he won. Match-wise, and we've talked about this a couple of times on the pod before, in that this is one of Triple H's downfalls, is that sometimes he just does things that he just doesn't need to, and it's quite arrogant. There was no need for him to go 20-odd, to say it was a 21-minute match, something like that, 21. There was no need for that. This needed to be shorter. And for him to drag it on at a point where I don't think Dave Batista was ready for that type of match, but just to do it because he's the mighty Triple H and he can lead Batista to that, I don't think the match was any good, and it was quite poor, and it was a shame because, again, in exactly the same situation as John Cena and JBL, the two of them proved they were capable of it, because when they had the Hell in the Cell a month or two after, that was a fantastic match. And now this been a bit more gimmick. This could have been better. Now, to be fair, Dave did improve it and get a lot better. So, kudos to him for that. But this was a bad match. But that aside, again, like I said, it sent the crowd home happy. It achieved the goal. He got to, sit there, raise the title above his head. Pyro going off. That's what you want from the end of the show. So it wasn't my taste, but it did what it was set out to do.
I thought Dave was so inexperienced at this point. I'm not sure you could have done much better than this. And I do take the point around how long it was. But I think you're never going to get Triple H to agree to anything less than sort of 20 minutes, which is what they got. We've sort of talked about the coronation, and I thought the people were definitely within more than Cena, but not overwhelmingly so, but not terrible. And I do think they got into it towards the end. I didn't think it was objectively bad, just sort of there. I'm not quite sure as good as solid, but the last few minutes were decent. But again, fair play to the company for making a babyface. I think a babyface is the most important thing you can have. The most important commodity in a wrestling company is your number one babyface, and that is you've got to do everything you possibly can to protect someone when the people are with them and ride that wave. And I think the company was in. They tried Benoit. Benoit was always probably going to be a short-term role that filled the gap at WrestleMania 20. Randy Orton, that was iffy. I think Randy had the potential to maybe work, but putting the title back on Triple H so quickly killed him, and all the stuff after that, it was dire. So this was the time. This was the time to try and pull the trigger. And I think actually it worked for both. If you look long-term for both of their careers, Batista, I remember when Batista gave this title up later in the year or Would it have been early the following year, Matt, or later this year? Later this year?
I think it was later in the year. Because he had to surrender the title, didn't he?
I remember it so vividly. There were people crying in the crowd.
Yeah.
This is how beloved this cool kind of like sort of nightclub bouncer but cool guy, and that he treats everyone quite nice. Like, do you know what I mean? Batista and Cena were very different. And Batista, I wasn't massively anti-Cena at this point, and I became more anti-Cena. But Batista, I always thought Batista was more the guy that you wanted to be like, rather than seeing this like this cheesy cartoon character over here. So I think more of the adult male fans were with Batista, and they were stars. Look at Batista now. You know, he's an absolute movie megastar. So the company pulled the trigger, and I think, you know, they deserve the plaudits for doing this on this night, because it would have been easy to screw one of them out of the title, but it was just important to these are the guys we're hitching our wagon to, and there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think they needed it. I think they really needed it. I think given what the roster was by this point, a lot of guys were either had been around for ages or they tried but not gone there. I'd even go as far as say with like Chris Jericho, for example. They tried and he wasn't meant to be a main event guy really. And obviously Benoit by this point had already had his go. They had Angle, but there was obviously issues there with Angle that would sort of materialize over the next year. They needed it. They needed this fresh impetus of main event guys. I think the choices of guys are really interesting because they were both back to the body guys that Vince loves. Two very different body guys, but still the body guys. And I was thinking before when we were talking about Cena, that these two winning probably prompted them to, or it probably made them feel more comfortable about going back to being PG when they did, because they thought, well, we've got the two guys now that actually appeal to a younger audience anyway than the sort of more adult male crowd that have been around since the Attitude Era, for example. But I think you're right with Batista. There was a sense that he could still do the harder edge stuff better. Cena just felt like juvenile, whereas Batista felt like a man, basically. Cena just felt like a little teenager that you kind of wanted to swat away, whereas Batista felt like a man. And I think Batista suffered after this point for two reasons. First of all, that move to PG probably did become a problem for him, because I think he probably would have appreciated a more adult presentation in general.
He was very outspoken on it.
Yeah. But also his move to SmackDown, I think, affected him. It made perfect sense, right? Because Cena and Batista had not done anything with the people on the other brand. So they had a whole new raft of options, including obviously the following year's WrestleMania main event. But Batista going to SmackDown meant he got the bum deal there, even though obviously he did have the matches with The Undertaker. There wasn't a lot else that he could do on SmackDown. There wasn't a lot else he could work with. To the point where I think we reviewed No Mercy 2006, I think, last year or the year before, and he's like against Finlay and Lashley and people that are either not ready or are really old. If Finlay past his best late 90s, you know, so it's like, I'm not saying he's a bad wrestler at all, don't get me wrong, but he's very old by the time he's facing Batista. So it just felt like he suffered from that point of view as well, and the fact that WWE have always portrayed SmackDown as the B brand, certainly during this period they did. So I think he kind of suffered from that too. In terms of this match, it was a bit better, I thought, than the Cena JBL match, but not a lot going for it really. I agree with you both. I think Batista just wasn't really ready for such a long match, and probably wasn't ready for such a big stature of a match either. Like, you know, it feels a bit like the Batista push was brought forward a long way because of what happened with Orton. I think they probably were hoping that Orton's push would be able to be sustained for a longer period of time, in which case they would be able to keep Batista with Evolution for longer, but then that didn't materialize, and so, you know, they had to kind of do this with him. And Triple H is just Triple H as always. I've got to have the wrestling match, I've got to have the long drawn out contest. I'm good enough to carry this guy to a match, when he's not. Triple H for me is a man who has dined out on 1 year of great in-ring work for 20 years after that point. I'm not saying he hasn't had good matches since then. He has, but his reputation as a very good wrestler has come entirely from that 1 year, and I don't think since then he's really done anything anywhere near the consistent quality since then.